Yet all that lives feels, and where something feels, there is weakness.
The Outer Worlds, a game developed by Obsidian Entertainment, taking place in a world where unfettered capitalism is taken to its logical extreme. The land is owned and operated by corporations, thus the people who live on it, past, present, and future, are not citizens, but employees. When they die, they are considered retired, and the body is considered company property. Early in the game, when reaching the walls of the corporate-owned town of Edgewater, you meet a man named Silas who describes his occupation as the town's junior in humor. In other words, he's a gravedigger.
I am employed by the retirement department of Spacer's Choice. That's fancy talk for working in the cemetery. Name's Silas, junior in humor for the town of Edgewater. We're all part of the Spacer's Choice family.
If you speak to him long enough, he'll eventually try and offer you a job collecting debts. So far, I've explained that the company owns the land, your body, and whatever you produce. The logical conclusion being that once you die, disposing of the body may not be all that simple.
Edgewater is a company town, board-owned and operated. That includes the cemetery. None of us own our gravesites, we rent them from the company. Renting means money. Money means paperwork. Paperwork means signatures. Some of our families become a mite delinquent in paying their dues, you see. Company policy. If it was up to me, I'd put the whole town 10 feet under, free of charge.
When someone dies, that person's relatives must compensate the company to have them buried on their land. However, the company is also the one who pays them, and their contract stipulates that they're not allowed to purchase products belonging to a competing company.
The Spacer's Choice family takes care of us from the cradle to the grave. As long as we provide our own cradles.
Multiple definitions of words like relative is used to justify payment on the others. A worker named Eugene committed suicide. This was of course regarded as an act of vandalism against company property.
Eugene wasn't family. Yeah, I was the closest living person relative to his body at time of death. I'm the one who found him, you see, so I pay the fines. Suicide's a crime. The legal term is irreparable damage to company property. What Eugene did to himself was vandalism.
You may be wondering, well, what if they don't pay up? What happens then?
Gravesite fees. Silas and I had talked about this at length. I thought I'd made it clear my pecuniary situation precludes the necessary restitutions. I mean that I can't possibly pay my gravesite fees. I simply cannot afford it. I am a blemish on the prosperity of our fair settlement. When I expire, I expect Silas to toss my body into a ditch. I have to be, if only to prepare myself for my inevitable dressing down at the hands of corporate.
Burials seem to be ingrained within the culture of Edgewater, so much so that to not pay for the burial fees of your loved ones and/or fellow man is looked upon as disgraceful. Throughout human history, there have been many methods of body disposal, like tossing the body over a cliff into a body of water or the animals to consume. We've also tried burning the bodies and ritualistic cannibalism, but at some point we determined that all of those methods were unsatisfactory, and we started burying the bodies. Then we started burying them within coffins, and now this is practiced by the majority of human cultures. Like everything else, burying a body was practical. Predators wouldn't find it, making it so they won't keep coming back. Do something long enough and it becomes tradition. We start adding elements to the tradition, like burying people with some of their possessions, holding funerals and putting them into boxes. We very well can't have decomposing corpses out at a funeral, so we started injecting them with embalming fluids. Institutions like religions became involved, and even businesses started to form around it.
It's not the best choice. It's Spacer's Choice.
Later on in the game, you encounter a woman named Adelaide.
I have been called that, among other things. Green Thumb, grandmother, the strange old lady who keeps flowers. But yes, Adelaide will do just fine.
She informs you that the soil of this planet is completely unsuited for farming, but she claims to have found a way to nourish the soil.
The soil around the Vale went sour years ago, but I found a way to sweeten it back up. The secret recipe is a little bit of elbow grease, a dash of love, and a heaping pile of special fertilizer.
With a little bit of detective work, you can deduce that her special fertilizer is human remains.
Marauder's been raiding my graves, you see. Hence the armed guards. Flesh-gnawing, marrow-sipping creatures of pure depravity they are. If those marauders swipe any more bodies out of my cemetery, company's gonna dock my pay.
She's been taking bodies from the Edgewater cemetery and using them to grow food for her congregation.
Stealing implies property. Are you trying to tell me that the husk of flesh that was Eugene's body belongs to Spacer's choice long after the spirit has left it? My dear, I wasn't keeping a corpse in my garden. I was returning it to the soil where it belonged, where it could do some good for my crops. The crops I grow here are natural, nutritious, healthy. My garden does more than fill the bellies of my flock. It keeps them from falling ill. Do you see anyone ailing in my camp? Unlike the people in Edgewater, my flock don't fall sick with plague. The Vale's barren. Been that way for years. Soil's been sterile about as long as I can remember. We are talking about organic compounds once inhabited by a sentient mind. A person lasts only until the last synapse burns out, the last brainwave flickers into the void. What remains is a carcass moldering neath the soil. Decomposition is a natural process, essential to new life. All life feeds on other life.
Cemeteries, burials, funerals, these traditions are not for the sake of the dead, they're for the living. In today's day, before you die, you can request that your body be treated a certain way. Although once you're dead, there's no guarantee that it will or should be honored. However, the surviving loved ones want to feel better and want to feel like they did good by their deceased loved ones. These feelings are important to us, so much so that we can inadvertently end up taking things too far, to the point where we're doing harm to ourselves, to our environment, or just being wasteful.
Hard to top in any time or culture is the extravagance of millionaire oil heiress Sandra Eileen West's burial. She writes explicit instructions in her will that she is to be buried in a lace negligee while sitting behind the wheel of her 1964 Ferrari. It takes a full construction crew complete with 2 cement trucks to fulfill her wishes.
To embalm a typical body requires 3 pounds of this formalin solution and sends 120 gallons of untreated funeral waste directly into the sewage system.
What Adelaide says about returning the body to the soil reminds me of a song by the band Agalloch. You may know them, I made a video using one of their songs before. This time I'm reminded of the song Falling Snow from their album Ashes Against the Grain. My sacrifice bids farewell in this river of memory. A wave to end all time. Red birds escape from my wounds. Return as falling snow to sweep the landscape. The song tells the tale of someone who dies out in the wild and how the body systematically returns to nature. The blood evaporates and returns as rain and snow. The meat feeding the animals and insects. The bones feed the earth and grow new life from the soil. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Now and forever, they are one with nature. Burying people locked within sealed caskets, encasing them within a sarcophagus, or entombing them within a mausoleum suspends this process. In real life, there's issues like land usage for cemeteries, chemicals affecting the environment, and so on. In the outer worlds, the people also have to contend with their wage slave salaries being garnished and imbalanced diets, leading to malnutrition.
You are disparaging our parent company, and it is not appreciated. We are a Spacer's Choice salt tuna cannery. We eat salt tuna here, and only salt tuna. The salt tuna's been a mite bland ever since Adelaide left, and we don't get as much salt tuna these days, so we've had to improvise to meet quotas. We've added wood chips, some mushrooms, bit of sand, tossed some canid bits in our processor once. It all tastes like salt tuna in the end.
Adelaide's solution for both problems is to use the bodies to grow food fit for human consumption. Her arguments stem from a naturalist's perspective. You can choose to tell this to Edgewater's corporate manager and he also approves, although from a corporatist's perspective.
Adelaide has been using dead bodies in her fertilizer? Come to think of it, that's a stroke of brilliance. What a remarkably efficient solution. Recycling Spacer's Choice property long after its date of expiration. I was wondering about those missing bodies in Silas's cemetery.
A very good case is made for Adelaide's solution. However, it's not without its consequences, chief of which is good old-fashioned human emotion. As mentioned, whatever happens after someone's death is for the sake of the living. Whether it's a gravestone, an urn, or a diamond, part of the tradition is to have a location or object for remembrance, and this desire can be strong.
In Mexico and Madagascar, first millennium peoples seem to have a hard time letting go of the dead. Every year, on the anniversary of a favorite relative's death, they dig up the remains of a loved one and invite friends over for a joyful celebration with the decomposed corpse as the guest of honor. Once the party is over, the dead are returned to their tombs.
The dead are still very much a part of the living in these ancient cultures, and ancestor remembrance, rather than calling it ancestor worship, it is very important, and is still very important to many cultures all over the world.
Oh, I don't know. If it was me, I'd be glad to volunteer. Keeping others alive, that'd be a beautiful gift to leave. But none of the folk you used had a say. You didn't ask, ma'am. And what about my dad? I talk to his grave every Saturday. Is he even there?
Robert is just where you left him, dear. He died too long ago. By now, he's naught but a skeleton.
Parvati, your party member, mentions that Adelaide never asked permission from the deceased. But one more time, whatever happens to the body is for the sake of the living. So if Adelaide was going to ask permission from anyone, it would be from people like Parvati, the loved ones of the deceased.
To believe in an ideal is to be willing to betray it.
When using this quote, it's always important to take heed of the key word in it, willing. Kreia isn't advocating for constant reconsideration of one's beliefs. She's telling you that you need to have the strength to question your beliefs, evaluate their usefulness, and if concluded, abandon or change them. Otherwise, you're leaving yourself exposed to being taken advantage of, as we've seen here.
It is to surrender yourself, to make yourself a slave to a teaching or belief that makes it so that belief will always rule you. Are you prepared to give up all that is a Jedi entirely? Until then, you will always be weak.
Spacer's Choice expertly preyed upon these people's traditions and sentimentality to pad their own bottom line. They even managed to disincentivize any thinking of not adhering to the tradition by having it be considered as a disgraceful act. It's considered disgraceful to not get taken advantage of by your employer. One way they no doubt accomplished this was by preying upon their sense of community.
When one of your workers commits a crime, the entire town pays for it. In other words, Edgewater would have been penalized pretty hard. Whatever Eugene was worth as an asset, we would have had to pay out of pocket to Spacer's Choice.
That I cannot say. There was no moment when the plagues began. Disease always lurks on the fringes of society, waiting to infect the idle and the lethargic. It is a well-documented fact that the wealthiest in society do not suffer from ailments of the constitution. I believe plague is a test. It is a test of our loyalty and our fortitude, and it is one we will see through to the end. Show up to work, put in your hours, wear a smile. Problems of the body come from problems of the spirit. Work improves the spirit and fortifies the body. Working through hardship is a sign of loyalty and strength. I didn't get to where I am now by lying on my sickbed whenever I came down with a case of the calenture. Medicine is a rare and precious commodity. If you demonstrate you have earned the right to be treated, you will be treated. Otherwise, you must heal yourself. Spacer's Choice is a family, and the survival of the family is more important than the survival of the individual.
So should they abandon this tradition? Yes, they should. They're getting stiffed by their company, and this could allow them to grow food, treating their malnutrition crisis. The only thing they lose is a specific location for ancestor remembrance. I know that it provides comfort. Many people speak to the graves of their loved ones, and it does make them feel better. But is it really worth subjecting the living to this?
Silas knows. He knows I got one foot in my grave and now he wants to charge me for the other one.
However, abandoning a long-held tradition may sound like it's easy to do on paper, but people are their own worst enemy. A person can be convinced relatively easily, but even when you can clearly show them that it's affecting them in a detrimental fashion, it can still take a Herculean effort to convince people.
A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it.
The practice of using human remains as fertilizer to feed the masses can also evolve into a tradition and become part of a religion. Just like everything that came before, you just need to do it for a long enough time. Parvati already described it in quite a romantic way.
Keeping others alive, that'd be a beautiful gift to leave.
Barring any extremes like war and human trafficking, this can be offset by the fact that human remains are a finite resource to Edgewater.
Edgewater's cemetery's got corpses aplenty, enough for a generation's worth of crops.
I'm not sure what the lifespan of the fertilizer is or how much they can grow from one corpse, but it could be that even with a whole cemetery, they'll run out of bodies eventually. They can't use older bodies either. By Adelaide's own words, Parvati's father was nothing but a skeleton, so she didn't use him. Even the local raiders, the marauders, aren't endless. Whenever someone passes away, they can use them, but it's still temporary. Eventually, they'll need to find another solution. This will only buy them the time to find it. I grew up in a culture that has many traditions. Most were perfectly fine, while some I found bizarre and others detrimental. When I expressed my opinions, people were not shy about voicing their displeasure, and they certainly weren't entertaining any ideas about changing. But I tried to convince minds for as long as I could, knowing that change may only come once the situation becomes too dire for it to be ignored. I just hope it won't be too late by then. Humans tend to be more reactive than proactive. Maybe someday we'll learn that traditions are nice, but that's all they are.